Welcome, everyone, to the understaffed Bellator 181 Vivisection with me, Zane Simon, and my co-host for the day, Victor Rodriguez. We were supposed to have Eddie Mercado with us as well, but because Connor's ass ran so late and because he talks so much, Eddie had to skip out on us, which, you know, I get it. No discredit to him. If he doesn't want to, if he can't wait for Connor's schedule, because nobody should have to. But that is where we are at the moment. And we are running through this show nonetheless, which means that I am woefully underprepared because I was prepared to be a host and not do analysis work, but going to do my best to just fight through it. So, Vic, thanks for joining me. We got this Bellator card in front of us, and it's not an especially, there's no hot fight on this card. There's no fight that makes you go like, oh, man, nah, that's going to be a war. I can't wait to see Joe Warren versus Steve Garcia, but it is a card that has a lot of notable fighters and interesting fights on it. There's a lot of people that even just casually that I recognize on here.
Yeah, that's true. It should be noted this card is going to be taking place in the splendid metropolis that is Thackerville, Oklahoma, at the WinStar Casino out there. And generally, we don't see the kind of talent that we're seeing on this card. We really are seeing some of these guys that maybe aren't probably not the big breakout stars, but some of them are kind of, they've been around, they've put on some pretty decent performances, and this should make for some pretty interesting MMA watching, even if they're, as you mentioned, there's not really much potential for, don't expect Rory McDonald versus Robbie Lawler on any of these. But still some pretty good fights, some interesting choices as far as the stylistic matchups between some of these fighters, and some pretty surprising names for what would be normally a sleeper card after the big blowout card they had a couple of weeks ago in New York. So it's definitely worth checking out, especially with a lot of meat on the prelims.
Absolutely. And so, we don't have odds for that much of it. There's only odds out for the main card. And this card has taken a few hits, too, I should note. It was supposed to have at the top of it Tricky Freire versus Derek Campos, but they pulled Freire from that fight. And Valerie Letourneau was supposed to be making her promotional debut against Emily Dakota, and Letourneau got injured, so she's been pulled from the card. Alexis Dufresne was supposed to fight Amanda Bell. Dufresne had to withdraw. And Valentin Moldavsky was supposed to make his debut against Javi Ayala, but they pulled Ayala and put in Carl Sumanutafa. So few last-minute shake-ups to this thing. At the bottom, I got to say, speaking of Carl Sumanutafa versus Valentin Moldavsky, that's one of the first fights that jumps off the page at me on this prelim card that I'm interested in. Moldavsky most recently having been part of the Ryzen World Grand Prix, making it in 2016, making it to the final round against Amir Ali Akbari for losing that fight by split decision. And generally, on the way up, looking like a pretty good combat sambo port to MMA for a big dude.
Very much so. And it almost feels like, I don't want to say that he's being wasted here on this card, but it is a bit, when you look at someone who's fought on that stage and you look at how tough that tournament was and how good a lot of those talents were, it feels like something of a missed opportunity that he's not being given a bigger platform. But I do like the matchup here against Sumanutafa, who we've seen before against Matt Mitrione. Ended up sneaking a shot or two and actually did some damage on Matt, but you know what? I'm actually no. I'm going to go the other way on this. It is a bit of a shame and a waste, considering what he can bring to the table. But I guess maybe they just needed to have him around the state. So there's multiple factors as to why. But yeah,
I just wish that he was actually going to be featured on the broadcast. No hate to Jessica Middleton and Emily Ducote, but
Right.
there are 4 or 5 other fights on this undercard that I would put above it, this being one of them. Like going from being like in the final round of a Ryzen Grand Prix to being buried at the bottom of a Bellator online prelim stream just seems like a shame. And I'm even fine with the Sumanatafa matchup, because Sumanatafa, like, he's got power. He's a very like live by the sword, die by the sword kind of fighter. He's going to go in there and he's going to go after somebody. He's going to make the fight exciting. It'll be a fun fight for Moldavsky no matter what.
Yeah.
It's just that as a potential, as an early prelim, it doesn't do anything for me. Also, before that, it should be noted on the prelims will be Logan Storley taking on Kemiele Haley. Kemiele Haley, maybe. Storley being
Kemiel, I guess.
Yeah. Top wrestling prospect, NCAA college wrestling prospect, now working out of Power MMA, who's run through his early competition, 5-0 now, all 5 wins by knockout. So somebody that Bellator, another big name wrestler that Bellator is investing in early. This will be his Bellator debut coming out of LFA.
Big pickup, and yet another one of those guys is coming over from the LFA, RFA talent pool that was usually seen as the guys that were primed to go to the UFC, but we're seeing Bellator snatch up a few of them as well. Very, very big pickup on their part, as well as another gentleman on this card, Romero Cotton, another NCAA phenom, 3-time champion, who is going to be making his professional debut on this card and fighting out of AKA. So that should be something to really look out for as well.
Yeah, they're all it has to do is for a couple of these guys to pay off, and a lot of them have done pretty well so far. They're just going out and they're getting every good wrestler that wants to do MMA and get them a contract right away. Half of them might turn out to be Aaron Pico. I mean, Aaron Pico may still be good, but half of them might turn out to be Bubba Jenkins. Maybe that's more fair.
Maybe, but I mean, some of them, if you can get one, Joey Davis, you get one of those guys, out of maybe.
Well, you get one Chris Weidman. You get one Darian Caldwell, who's done really well. You get, a few guys like that, and you get some legit talent on the dirt cheap.
And before anybody jumps in, yes, Chris Weidman had initially signed for Bellator a long, long time ago, but that's another conversation for another time.
Yeah. Let's see. Also moving up, they've got former UFC tough fighter Guilherme Vasconcelos is on this undercard as well. Fighting EJ Brooks. Then Rafael Lovato Jr. is fighting Mike Rhodes on the prelims. In about that, I'm actually really interested in that fight.
Yeah, very, very interesting bout. Biggie Rhodes, the Rufus Sport product, very tough, very dynamic athlete. Just a really fighter who's hit a bit of a rough patch, but he sort of looks like he's putting his pieces together as he's coming up. And Lovato, mostly known for his jiu-jitsu, a lot of people sleep on it, man. I mean, the guy grew up doing Jeet Kune Do and boxing. So his striking he's definitely not a guy who just started months ago in order to start doing MMA. He's been around and he's done a lot. So even though he doesn't have anywhere near the kind of notoriety for his striking, he's definitely willing and capable of giving some people some surprises. So this is really a great match to check out.
Yeah, Rhodes. I mean, he's a dude who he got to the UFC before he was ready. He got to the UFC at 5-1. I think, or 6-1.
Yeah.
And didn't have a complete game at all. Lost 3 straight, but hasn't lost since then. He's looked solid ever since getting cut. And Lovato is, he's 34, but his MMA career just started in late 2014, so he's still finding his way in MMA. Great pickup for Bellator, just as like somebody with a name, with something established, and with something interesting to bring, who's old enough that they're not going to be like a super prospect, but could immediately make a splash as a fun, interesting fighter in the division. And yeah, so far he's been knocking out and submitting everyone. So he's living up to his martial arts pedigree to date. I would probably expect Rhodes to be the first roadblock for Lovato, but Rhodes has not been a great finisher in his career, and Lovato has been. So if this becomes like, if Lovato can drag this into a grappling battle or catch him with something hard early, then he has an opportunity to turn it around. Otherwise, I see this as a big jump in competition for Lovato.
Yeah, I mean, neither one of these guys suffers too much with a loss, but and a win keeps them afloat. So it's a nice place to be.
After that, jump to Justin Lawrence is fighting Tristan Thompson. Lawrence, also a former tough guy, somebody the UFC had slightly invested in as a prospect who didn't pan out, who's been doing pretty well for Bellator. Split decision loss to Emmanuel Sanchez, unanimous decision to John Teixeira, but otherwise looked pretty good. And Andre Fialho taking on AJ Matthews. Fialho 7-1, coming out of Portugal, fighting out of AKA, and just suffered his first loss to Chidi Njokuani. So this feels like it's probably a chance to bounce back against a very good veteran fighter a very solid veteran fighter in AJ Matthews.
Definitely agreed. Just to be noted here, Fialho was a guy who, I mean, there's no shame in losing to someone who's a much more complete and experienced striker in Njokuani. So, I mean, that fight really, it's something that he can learn from, and he's still with AKA. So there's still a lot of progression that he can make. It's definitely not something that will set him back tremendously. Just a quick note on Matthews. He has lost 3 straight, unfortunately, 2 of them being finishes. Very, very tough opponent. Excellent wrestling game. So I'm interested in seeing how they're going to be able to deal with each other's strengths. Don't let those numbers fool you. It should be a good fight.
Yeah. AJ Matthews he's one of those dudes that like he doesn't win all the time, but there's a reason that he got brought into Bellator, into Strikeforce, and then has immediately gone over to Bellator and has been fighting for them ever since. It's that he's a tough out, and he's a good test for guys. It fits right. He fits right into Scott Coker's whole thing of like a hot prospect gets a loss. You drop him down against somebody that's going to be a tough fight, but he'll probably win, and it builds him back up. And next fight he'll probably throw Fialho back up at like Paul Daly or something, and just keep building him like that.
Yeah.
But that brings us to our main card now, and a strawweight bout: Jessica Middleton versus Emily Dakota. What do you got on this fight?
It's a rough one. I mean, Dakota being a local Oklahoma fighter makes some degree of sense that they'd put her on the card in a I mean, she's in a strange position because she is one of these fighters that they're trying to really promote and build up for their flyweight division. So that, combined with the fact that she's local and she is capable of putting on some really fun performances, would net her on the main card. Done talking about how some of these fights probably could have taken that place, but there's not much we can do about that now. Middleton is a very, very tough fighter out of mostly the Kansas scene. She's been with Bellator so far, being 2-1, winning some really tough decisions against Alice Yager and Bruna Ellen. Not necessarily the most, to put this diplomatically, the most elegant striker that there is out there. Just a lot of grit, a lot of determination, some winging hooks. Her takedown defense is pretty good starting off, and everything starts to sort of taper off. The skill that she actually has, from what you see in her training footage, starts to fade pretty much as things go on. And that's just, it's not a knock. It's something that happens a lot in this sport. And, you start relying on your physicality and athleticism. I don't think that's going to serve her very well against somebody like Dakota, who's just really got very, very sneaky jiu-jitsu and is able to sort of cut a few corners when it comes to going from, say, side control to mount and start striking from there and then working for attacking with submissions. So Middleton's going to have a bit of a she's going to have a lot on her hands here. And I don't really like her odds on this one. So I'm going to have to go with Dakota on this.
Especially Dakota's ability to finish late that she's shown in her fights, picking up second-round submission over Kenya Miranda and a second-round submission over Bruna Vargas suggests that, especially if, gas tank is a problem for Middleton, then as this fight goes on, she's probably going to lose. Odds on this bout, Dakota is the favorite, opening at -185 and dropping down to -245 now. Middleton opening at +145, rising to +197. So everybody's pretty much seeing this as a probable win for Dakota. That brings us to a featherweight or bantamweight bout between Joe Warren and Steve Garcia Jr.
I don't know, man. Joe Warren's been his age and his lapses mentally during some of these fights. They've really affected him. I don't want to say increasingly in his last few fights, but they just become so much more pronounced that it's become a thing of a liability. And I'm not sure how much I can trust a reliable hand who's fought better opposition and who's lost to better guys than Steve has actually beaten. So, without going too deep into the whole MMA math thing, it's going to work out because Garcia has a really good rangy striking game. He's very tricky with his wrestling defense as well. He's really good at getting that immediate sprawl and then working out of tough positions. Really good at striking off his back too. So if Warren ends up taking him down, which I'm sure he will at some point, there's not really, it won't be an easy task for Warren to finish him. What I'm having some trouble with here is seeing Warren actually take the fight to the ground without taking much damage. I really feel like he's going to be eating a couple of shots before that actually takes place. And, at this point, I mean, for a guy who's, how old is Joe Warren at this point? Is he 40 yet? He's 40 right now. So, he's not your average 40-year-old. He's not a guy who's been, it's not a guy like BJ Penn who just fell off precipitously in a very short period of time. But, it's not going to be pretty. This is not going to be, as easy for Warren as some of his other fights have been. And while I do expect him to win, I can't trust him 100% on that. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say that Warren takes a considerable amount of damage and then eventually sort of ekes out the win, most likely by decision.
Yeah, just watching the way that Steve Garcia Jr. fights, he's kind of got this sort of pseudo Dominic Cruz thing to his game. Lots of leaping in and out and like trying to pick his shot, pick shots behind that and all that. Unfortunately, that also means that because he's not Dominic Cruz, he's not landing with a lot of power, and
right.
It puts him it means he's leaping into takedowns. So he could catch Warren out cold. But I feel like it also just sets him up to leap into being taken down a lot and leap into Warren's wrestling game. So
yeah, it's a matter of timing it right, and I don't think that Warren. I'm pretty sure Warren knows that. So
yeah, I think that it's a good setup fight for Warren to win, and if he loses it, then it's just a really bad sign. It's a sign that he should be hanging him up.
Probably. But he's stubborn, so don't bet on that either.
No, he's definitely stubborn. Warren opened at -175, has dropped down to -207 since. Garcia opened at plus 135, is up to plus 169 now. And yeah, it is also worth noting. I mean, Garcia does have some knockouts. You know, it's not like he's powerless.
He does, and it's just shit. I don't want to say anything negative about his past opposition, but there's a certain level at that point that once you pass that, it's just going to be a lot more rare to see that happen, I guess.
Indeed. All right. That brings us to the co-main event, Kendall Grove versus John Salter. What a weird-ass fight to see as a co-main event in, like, 2017.
Yes. Yeah, it really is. It's a very I mean, shit, where do you even start? You know what I mean? Like two guys that, I mean, Kendall Grove, who I'm surprised is still, if you were to tell 2010 me that he would still be around in 2017, take that. I just, yeah, wow, Kendall Grove.
Anyway, what are your thoughts on it? Beyond being...
Yeah. Beyond this whole thing being weird. Okay, so John Salter, a little bit of background on him. Way back in the day, and I'm talking back in 2010. He started off in the UFC. He went 2-1 there with losses to Gerald Harris and Dan Miller. He did have a win against Jason McDonald, which was due to injury. After that, he got bounced. He had a stint, one fight in Strikeforce, and ended up pretty much all over the regional scene. Basically took 2 years off from 2013 to 2015, and he's currently on a 5-fight win streak. Now, he's been with Bellator for 3 fights, and if you don't remember those fights, I'm not going to fault you for that because they've been fights that have either been in Temecula at the Pachanga or his last fight was in Italy. So he hasn't really gotten that much screen time because there are these sort of odd venue choices on events that don't really get as much promotion, much like this one, which is going to be in the middle of goddamn nowhere and on a fight card that a lot of people probably forgot was even taking place this week. Like, I don't know, me on Monday. So, 5 wins in a row. All of them have been finishes. 3 of them were chokes and 2 TKOs. Really very solid fighter, very good wrestling, imposing with his physicality, pretty decent with his boxing fundamentals, and pretty deceptive in how he closes the distance. I mean, I'm not gonna say he's Tyron Woodley or anything like that, but he does have that thing where he plays with his reach and his movement, and you kind of think like, no, there's no way that's gonna hit me, and he ends up cracking him. So very, very interesting to see how this is going to play out on that end. And then on the other hand, you've got Kendall Grove, who is still chugging along. Sort of, I mean, at this point, his ceiling has been very, very well defined. Last fight was a loss to Alexander Shlemenko, where he got beat up back in October of last year. I don't know how I can really put much stock into Kendall Grove, you know, being a lock for this. He's certainly experienced, great jiu-jitsu game, a lot of, just when you think he's out of it, he can manage to do a few things, but it's so rare. Those occasions are so few and far between that I don't really see that as being something that's terribly reliable. So if Salter gets sloppy, he might end up getting triangled or something like that, but I wouldn't really count on it. I think that it's a lot more of a safer bet to say that Salter's probably going to ride out a decision here or end up knocking him out with ground strikes or, at least the fight later on.
Yeah, I think Salter, if my memory serves me correct, it's been forever since I can remember seeing one of his fights, but he's really, he's not a fighter that tends to getting sloppy isn't his problem. He's not going to do the most exciting things. He's not the most dynamic offensive marvel in the world, but it's usually you have to be more dynamic than him to beat him. And Grove is more of the you need to give him sloppy mistakes these days for him to win. The kind of guys he's beating are guys that make big mistakes, give him a lot of stuff to work with, and I think that should make for a fight that Salter wins.
Right.
Salter is the favorite going in here, opening at -190, dropping to -225, now at -217. Grove, the underdog, opening at +150, jumping up to +175. So, no big deal. Not about what I would expect for Kendall Grove, like John Salter, Kendall Grove. Certainly reasonable spread there. Salter's a favorite.
I'm gonna call these Oklahoma numbers because I mean, really, like the odds makers probably aren't really keeping that close an eye on any of this.
Yeah. Under 1.5 rounds is +115. Both guys. Salter has finished every one of his fights, I believe. He has never been to decision, going all the way back to 2009, King of the Cage. And he has only been out of the first round twice in those wins. So he also gets finished in all his losses.
Yeah, Grove might tie him up for a little longer than that. I don't know. He might break that streak here.
Maybe, but Kendall Grove also tends to be only a finish or get finished kind of guy. He's got a few decisions on his record, but he tends to be. Yeah. You give him something and he'll finish it. The only problem there with Grove would be that he doesn't tend to be an early finisher. Grove's finishes tend to be after things have gotten a little difficult, after guys have faded and gotten a little more sloppy, things like that. So. Let's see. That brings us to the main event. Brandon Girtz, Derek Campos. The third meeting of these two, which, my God, boy, did we ever need the Brandon Girtz, Derek Campos rubber match.
Hey, man, listen, the streets were yearning for this one. I mean, I'm telling you.
Right.
This is it's happening at a 158 catch weight, apparently. I don't know what to it's just a really strange, I guess it's just a matter of the circumstances surrounding it and the fact that this was a replacement, an injury replacement situation. God, what a rough patch this whole thing was for Girtz. And yeah, again, this is Jesus. All right, well, starting off with Derek Campos, who is 18-6, probably had his most his biggest or most well-known performance was his win over Melvin Guillard and that infamous Kimbo versus Dada card. I'm sorry, Shamrock versus Gracie 3 card back in February of last year, which the less we talk about that, the better. Ended up with, let's see, 3 wins in a row, 2 that came after that, both of them decisions. Campos can be a very capable and technical striker. He's really good at working from the mid-range, and he's really good at drawing guys into sort of his tempo and a position that's optimal for him to get his strikes off and sort of pick them apart. The problem is really, if it's anything other than that, you're not really going to see anything that's terribly exciting. His wrestling is okay. His submission defense is excellent. I don't really see him being at any sort of crazy disadvantage here. When you look at Brandon Girtz, here's another guy who ended up beating Melvin Guillard, and that was probably his apex in his professional career in terms of name value. Ended up fighting Derek Campos and beating him after that in 2015, and since then has had 2 consecutive losses, both of them by decision. One of them against Adam Piccolotti, which, if I remember correctly, was a pretty close bout, which probably could have gone either way. Don't quote me on that. I don't totally remember that one 100%. But the point is that Girtz is going to be, he's got a disadvantage in terms of his reach, really dynamic with his wrestling, and his cardio is actually great. Some fights it doesn't look that great, but for most of his performances, he's been able to hang on and continue his pressure later on in the fight. So it won't be easy. And Campos isn't exactly a guy who's been consistent with finishing opponents or knocking people out. So, yeah, I don't as good as Girtz is, I don't really see this being a guarantee for either one of these guys, but I'm going to have to lean with Campos on this one. He's got more of a hot hand. He seems to be really picking up the pieces and putting everything together, and I think he's just his particular style of fighting, be more conductive to winning rounds, is going to be able to do more than Girtz's wrestling advantage can really do. So I'm going to have to go with that.
Yeah, this is one of those times where, like, you know, I've seen both of these guys fight before, but I wasn't expecting to do any analysis for this. I was expecting to host and not prepared. And I cannot for the life of me remember Derek Campos or Brandon Girtz at all. Like, they just sort of blend into this background level of sameness, like MMA sameness. Like,
they could have been the same guy for all you knew.
Yeah, like, oh, power, you know, these sort of like generic muscly white dudes that with no hair that throw down reasonably well. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wish I could add more to that, honestly. I think my memory of Girtz, man, is maybe of him getting knocked out by Derek Anderson, but even that seems so vague. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Hey, it happens.
I mean,
what can you
my
do?
guess is that Campos, my vague recollection of him is of being a better round winner than Brandon Girtz, and Brandon Girtz being more of a brawler.
Yeah.
But, you know, odds are on Campos's side. I'm not going to pretend that I went deep on this one because, like I said, I just was not set up to do this. And yeah, it's weird because the more I talk about this card, the less thrilled I become by it. It's a fine card. There are lots and lots of fighters I'm interested in on it. Interested in on it. But getting into actually any of the fights specifically, I'm just like, eh.
I mean, I don't blame you very much.
That's a weird one.
Yeah. There's not a
Joe
crazy
Warren
amount of
versus some kid. Okay.
This is, you know what? This is the equivalent of what a Fox Sports 1 card generally would be for the UFC. Like, look, this is where the sausage gets made, man. You want to see a guy,
I spent way too much time getting to know UFC FS1 cards, so I can't use that excuse.
Yeah.
I'm just checked out. No,
but I'm just saying that, like, you know, I get your point. I mean, this is kind of that build-up thing. It kind of brings up that degree of meh, just with a lot less sizzle at the top, which is something that we do see on Fox Sports 1 cards. So it just kind of is what it is, man. It's the fight game. You're not always going to get that, you know, sometimes you're going to roll snake eyes.
Girtz is opening as the underdog, plus 135, now dropping down to plus 127. Campos opening as the favorite at minus 175, rising up to minus 153. They have split their fights before this. Campos coming in off of 3 wins. Girtz coming in off 2 losses. But, you know, the thing I can say just offhand is Girtz lost to Fernando Gonzalez really hurts his cred coming into here. Not that Fernando Gonzalez is bad. Fernando Gonzalez is much better than you'd expect. But he's also a very unathletic, busy fighter who is difficult to beat because he's busy and tough. And losing to him kind of generally means that you just don't have a very well-constructed MMA game. So
yeah, and I also, for a guy who's been fighting so much at Campos being at, well, you know what? No, they've both fought at 170 and 155. So I don't really know about weight cuts being a major thing here, unless one of them really has a tough cut for this. So
yeah, I don't know. It's all over the place. On that note, I'm not going to drag this out any further. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneTime. You can find Vic on Twitter at Vic M. Rodriguez. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. Give us a like over on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be back tomorrow, Yumi and Dio, for the Invicta Vivisection, and I won't have to be better prepared for that because I'll have 2 people who do all the prep. And We will be back
Not
for
deal.
the 6th round and on Sunday, and then fights next week for the UFC Weidman versus Gastelum fight card is next week. So we'll have all our normal stuff for that. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.